beetle trees. So call us at 568-6898. That's 568-6898.
LibertyRevoltMedia.com.
Well, good morning, guys. 6:05 a.m., Tuesday, January 5th. Live from KHNC Studios in Johnstown, Colorado. It's your host, Bucky Dillon, the Bucky Dillon Morning Show, our morning show, a collaborative between myself and the freedom-loving community in Northern Colorado and our listeners all around the world, streaming from 1360khnc.com. You can contact the office anytime at 970-587-5003. Let them know that you love me, guys, because I love you. Hey, it's going to be a pretty good day. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I think 2021 could possibly be moving in the right direction. I know that the news likes to focus on all the things going wrong, but there are a lot of great things happening in the world. Did you know that as of recently, 50% of the entire globe is now technically in the middle class? Did you know that the UN predicts that by 2030, we could essentially end abject poverty? Now, abject poverty is defined by the equivalent of $1.95 a day. But that number was actually pretty significant. And the fastest growing economies in the world are all in Africa, right? Birth rates are slightly going down in the United States. The population growth for some groups is essentially flatlined, which is sad. But for the vast majority of the world, things are actually getting better. Did you know that there's more forest in China now and in the northern hemisphere altogether than there was in the 1700s, 1800s? That's because when people are poor, they kill everything they can to eat, and they burn everything they can to stay alive. And as it turns out, burning coal is a lot better for the environment than burning wood. Now, one of the big mistakes we're making in our green movement is we're moving towards biomass, right? You hear all these people talk about solar and wind. For some reason, they write off nuclear, which doesn't make any sense to me, because if you care about actually efficient, clean energy that doesn't pollute the atmosphere, global warming, all that, I mean, you should investigate nuclear, right? And for those who say, well, we've had nuclear meltdowns that have caused huge problems, it's true. But the first light bulb didn't work either, right? Look at the cars we have now. Look at the cars we had when cars came out. So we are making technological improvements, and it has been a long time since we had a nuclear meltdown. We have gotten to the point to where we're using nuclear to run submarines and aircraft carriers and all kinds of things all around the world. But things are getting better. We are moving mostly in the right direction. You'll never hear that from politicians. You'll never hear that from the media, because as is life, human beings are more susceptible to negative emotion as positive emotion. And you might be wondering why. Well, it's because you can only really be so happy, right? But you could be dead too. So obviously human beings are going to be pre-designed to be a little more susceptible to negative emotion than positive emotion. And part of that's because there's a lot of dead people who weren't scared when they should have been scared, right? So having a healthy level of anxiety isn't necessarily the worst thing for you. So as I was saying earlier, we are now live streaming. The 6 o'clock hour to the 7 o'clock hour is now live streamed. You can find that live stream at youtube.com/Liberty Revolt if it's working. And I'll double check that here during the next commercial break and see what's going on with that. The weather looks like it's going to be pretty nice. I think I might have mentioned that. It's going to be almost 50 degrees around noon, 1 o'clock. And for most of the day, it's going to be partly cloudy, no chance of rain, mildly windy, but that's just what the Weather Channel says. And do we really trust those people? Some interesting things happened on this day in history. January 5th, in 1477, the Battle of Nancy, Burgundy versus Switzerland, 7,000 plus killed, including their leader, Charles, Duke of Burgundy. In 1781, British naval expedition led by Benedict Arnold burns Richmond, Virginia. But these are the two that I think is the most striking from this day in history. 1919, German Workers' Party forms, precursor to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. So the development of the Nazi Party started on this day in Munich, Germany. In 1930, on this day, Mao Zedong wrote, "A single spark can start a prairie fire," which is considered to be a very impactful piece of his writings. And it's interesting. So for those who don't know, I've spent some time in China. My wife is Chinese. My family is Chinese. And it's actually been interesting talking to them because, as many people know, Mao Zedong is still revered in China. And it doesn't make sense to people in the West because we see 100 million dead. Now, some people argue 40 million, 60 million, right? The records aren't totally clear. 100 million. But let's be honest. When you're counting corpses by the tens of millions, you've kind of made your point, right? And people wonder, how could Mao Zedong be so revered in China? More on that when we come back from the break. You're listening to the Bucky Dillon Show, our morning show, a collaborative between myself and the freedom-loving community. You can contact me anytime at buckydillon@khnc.net or libertyrevoltmedia@gmail.com. We'll be right back.
Join us and don't miss a moment of the Alex Jones Show, your number one source for real independent media. Find out what the mainstream media doesn't want you to know. InfoWars is pro-America, pro-family, pro-freedom. We are rebooting 1776. Exclusive reports, live coverage, information you won't find anywhere else. Tomorrow's news today. Stay informed by listening to KHNC 1360 AM.
Alex is here 1 o'clock, Monday through Friday, right here on the Roar of the Rockies.
Hi, this is Martina McBride. With online news, social media, and texting available 24/7, the world seems to be spinning faster and faster every day. And it can be overwhelming. Sometimes we just need to unplug and take a break from our electronic devices. It can help reduce stress and allow us to reflect on the things that are really important in our lives.
This message brought to you courtesy of the United States Air Force.
Hi, this is radio host Bob Enyart. Years ago, my program aired daily on Colorado's KHNC. I've moved on, but I'm still standing for justice and freedom, and I'm still with Colorado Right to Life. We're asking you to join us by standing up for the God-given right to life of every unborn child. We're all in the fight of our lives, really the fight for their lives, these kids. So please check us out online at coloradorighttolife.org. God bless.
Triangle Cross Ranch, 36049, County Road 51, P.O. Box 727, Gailton, Colorado 80622, needs sponsors for the holidays to adopt a house of God's children. They need holiday-spirited friends to help bring Christian blessings to the home, because home away from home is what COVID has brought this year. Call Triangle Cross Ranch, 970-454-2219. Blessings to KHNC and his family.
Tell me how long you gonna stay?
Bucky Dillon Morning Show, Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. It is 6:15 a.m. Hopefully you're tuning in on your morning drive or while you get up and have a cup of coffee. Maybe you caught part of the last hour. I like to start off with a little bit of music and a little bit of reading and thinking. Doing a book club. You can hang out with me in the mornings if you want to be a part of that book club. You can even recommend the next book. I'm going to be putting a reading list up on my website, libertyrevoltmedia.com. You can check it out. You can contact me at buckydillon@khnc.net or at libertyrevoltmedia@gmail.com and recommend a book. It doesn't have to necessarily be on the reading list. And then if you are part of the book club, you can call in on the last segment of the 5 to 6 hour, and we can have a conversation about what we've been reading and try to take some of the ideas we've read about and combine them with our knowledge, with our instincts, with our intellect, and make it a part of our worldview if we want. Now, I opened up this hour by telling you that on this day in 1930, Mao Zedong wrote, "A single spark can start a prairie fire." And I will tell you, folks, a prairie fire is absolutely what he sparked. I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to try to help us understand why Chinese society still reveres him, regardless of a lot of the tragedies that he invoked. January 5th, 1930, Mao writes, "A single spark can start a prairie fire." In 1925, at a crucial time for the process of liberation and reunification of China, Sun Yat-sen, the historic leader of Kuomintang, died. He was succeeded by Chiang Kai-shek, the young commander of the military academy of Whampoa. Engaged in a massive military campaign for the reunification of the country. And for those who don't know that much about Chinese history, it is a constant unification of the country under imperial rule, followed by the collapse of an empire, and the country would break down into warring factions, and eventually another military leader or emperor would rise to prominence and reunify the country. And China has always seen its biggest weakness is a lack of unification. And that's how they justify so many of the crackdowns and the censorship on religion, on freedom of the press, things like that, is because they prioritize unification over freedom. And they justify that to themselves. For number one, the country is 5,000 years old, and they've never invaded an outside country. Now, things are changing, and you could say Taiwan and Hong Kong are semi-autonomous, but historically, Chinese civilization has been in and around those areas forever. In fact, in Chinese tradition, they actually have their own origin stories that the Chinese people evolved there. They didn't migrate there from, say, Africa. Like, the West believes that we all came from Africa and migrated around the world. I read some interesting things that in some parts of China, they actually teach that they evolved from a primate species that originated in China. So anyways, as I was saying, they strongly value the unification of the country. And that's part of it. So in Chiang Kai-shek engaged in a massive military campaign for the reunification of the country. The National Revolutionary Army, founded by Kuomintang in 1925, managed to free the city of Wuhan, you might be familiar, Shanghai, and Nanjing. If you want to learn some interesting history about World War II, check out what the Japanese did in Nanking. Concerned by the support that the communist fringe protagonists in the liberation of Wuhan had obtained from the Soviet Union, Chiang Kai-shek was resolved to expel them by force, and in April 1927, he executed in Shanghai more than 12,000 members of the Communist Party. The 10-year civil war that followed, interrupted only in 1936 after the incident in Xi'an and the formation of the Second United Front, were crucial for the Communist Party in China, which was to determine if and how to continue the process of liberation of China. Now that Kuomintang was considered an enemy even worse than the Japanese, and that's saying a lot, and the greedy warlords that raged in the south. In those dark times, Mao Zedong, with the intent to address the concerns and fears of the party and to criticize pessimistic ideas, wrote an open letter. A single spark can start a prairie fire. Posted on January 5th, 1930, Mao's essay was intended to indicate the path to follow. Instead of being intimidated by the cruelties of Kuomintang and therefore give in to pessimism and consider the revolution as a project to be put off, the revolutionary process had to change its course. Aiming to avoid any leftist line, Mao was well aware that the first phase of the revolution had failed, and that trying to foment outbreaks of rebellion in big cities with the intent to overthrow the local governments would have only made more bitter of a defeat. Instead, participating in the discontent of peasants, workers, and students, the idea of Mao was to create rural revolutionary base areas, a dense network of logistical support to gain popular support and strengthen the People's Liberation Army, persisting in guerrilla warfare and avoiding direct contact with the enemy. Composed by following the scientific method of Marxism-Leninism, Mao's letter really pointed the direction to take and offered to the Communist Party of China, repeatedly forced to retreat and regroup after the Long March of 1930, a solid model to follow, granting them the confidence and support of vast regions in southern China. Now, the Long March of 1930, that was actually some really interesting history too. And if you want to learn about the resilience and the ability to coordinate and innovate, China literally picked up entire cities and moved across the country because they were being slaughtered by their enemies. They picked up entire cities and moved them and then created factories where they then built military infrastructure in brand new cities that they built during the Long March. I mean, people legitimately marched across the entire continent and took apart every steel structure, railway, everything they could, and hauled it by hand on carts and by donkey and horse across the entire continent, and then created military infrastructure. So that was actually, that'll give you a really good look at just how resilient and innovative the Chinese people are. It was thanks to those areas at the end of World War II that the Communist Party was able to absorb the impact of the military campaigns of the Kuomintang and was then able to counterattack and finally win in 1949. Considered a fundamental contribution of Maoism to the Marxist-Leninist doctrine, the spark that ignites the prairie fire is an image still repeated in many rallies or other public occasions to describe situations of tension, which, if properly channeled, can lead to large changes. Although Mao himself could not predict when and where the spark would ignite, in his letter, he was sure that the revolution was like a child about to be born, moving restlessly in its mother's womb. So I started to tell you guys that a lot of people in the Western world can't understand why the Chinese admire Mao Zedong, even though he left I mean, he's responsible for the deaths of more people than almost any other revolutionary dictator in history, right? People are horrendously ignorant of what happened in Soviet Russia during the rise of communism. People know a little bit about Nazi Germany. They've heard 6 million Jews, but in Mao's China, in internal repression alone, we're talking 60 million, 40 million, 100 million dead bodies. And yet Mao is still revered. So my father-in-law actually idolizes Mao. And we've had a couple discussions. Of course, it's difficult because of the language barrier to understand. But the way the Chinese see it is they had a tremendous 5,000 year long history. The difference between China and Europe, they were almost equally as technologically advanced, believe it or not. The reason Europe conquered the world was almost out of necessity, because so much of Europe is frozen, rocky, unlivable land, and a lot of European civilizations could only survive by going to other lands and taking. And so they created ships and armor and warfare. And I mean, almost every civilization had armor and weaponry, of course, but the Europeans really invested a lot into that, into those kinds of innovations. But China had everything it needed. So, you know, you look throughout Chinese history, most of China's warfare has been with China until the 20th century. They had established trade routes, the Silk Road, but they had incredible technology, but they didn't go around the world because they had everything they needed right there. So when the British came to China during the height of the British Empire, that began what later became known to the Chinese as the Century of Humiliation. Essentially, the British started selling opiates in China. And this is part of the reason why drugs are so illegal there. Why, if you have marijuana, you'll go to prison for a long time. It's not a slap on the wrist. It's big trouble. And part of their justification for that is that when the British came and sold opiates to the Chinese, it set their civilization back 100 years because so many of their people ruined their lives with opiate addiction. And of course, that's happening now in the United States for various reasons. A lack of border security being one, pharmaceutical companies probably being the largest reason. But that was only part of the Great Humiliation. The second part was when China resisted the British defeated them and then forced them to buy opiates. And so China's had kind of a bitter relationship with the West ever since. And they considered this era the century of humiliation, because it wasn't just that the British were dominating and exploiting them. It was also that their own political leadership had failures, and the country fractured apart into warring factions. And when Mao came along, in some ways he did reunite the country. You're listening to 1360 KHNC, the Bucky Dillon Morning Show, our morning show. Get a hold of me anytime at buckydillon@khnc.net or libertyrevoltmedia@gmail.com. Hit the website, 1360khnc.com, www.libertyrevoltmedia.com. Hang around for the break. We will be right back with Roar of the Rockies.
Hello, my name is Keith, and I'm the host of the program, The Pursuit of God, on 1360 KHNC, and I invite you to join me Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock as we go on this great pursuit of God.
No people will tamely surrender their liberties, nor can any be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. On the contrary, when people are universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink under their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. Samuel Adams.
Hey folks, in today's world of turmoil and change, how do you prepare for the next crisis? With propaganda-filled airwaves, who do you trust for the straight scoop? Our company, PacManUSA.com, is built on 60 years of experience, truth, and integrity. We offer hard-to-get items covering a wide range of needs, things not found in the local big box store. Visit us at PacManUSA.com. That's PacManUSA.com.
Know someone with a drinking or drug problem? Learn how to get sober after we share these stories.
I was 35 with two beautiful children when my life and addiction started to spiral out of control. After my divorce, I went into a depression cycle and started drinking more often and using prescription drugs. After my second DWI and arrest, my ex-husband threatened to take our children away from me.
I was 17 when I became addicted to heroin and meth. I thought I could quit on my own, but I couldn't. It hit me when I was arrested.
Get sober now. Your private insurance may cover costs and we'll get you here. It's simple. Just call Elite Rehab Placement right now. Please don't wait. Your life matters to us. 800-958-2153. 800-958-2153. 800-958-2153. That's 800-958-2153.
This is Sam Shook, Navy Vet and Medicare Specialist. I just want to thank the KHNC listeners for their support and trust in me as their Medicare specialist. If you are currently on Plan F, we are in a window of opportunity that can save you a lot of money towards your monthly premium. Please contact me at 970-413-4939. If you are getting into Medicare soon or are already enrolled and have questions, please call me at 970-413-4939. Again, thanks KHNC listeners.
This is Larry Jagger, the host of the SCL Mortgage Show. SCL has a loan program for just about every residential need. Listen and learn what that means to you on Saturday at 12 noon on KHNC 1360, NMLS number 1200716.
So Mao came along in the midst of this century of humiliation that China genuinely believed was an anomaly. Right? A lot of people in the West think of China as a country that has been poor and backwards. Well, then you don't know China. China, for one of the largest parts of world history, was the most successful economy everywhere. And they did it by their own means. Some of the greatest architectural finds ever discovered are in China. I mean, the first emperor of China built the terracotta army like 5,000 years ago. And if you've never seen the terracotta army, I suggest you look it up. It's located in Xi'an, China. That's actually my wife's city. So there's this century that they believe was the century of humiliation, when China was fractured apart into warring subfactions, and these powers from the West came and exploited them and really knocked them down in their place in the world. And then, of course, throughout the 20th century, there was what the Japanese did to China and everything else. But back to Mao, he really got everyone on the same page. And people say, how could you revere someone who set out the Red Guard? What the Red Guard was essentially the activist base. It was primarily students and workers, but the activist base of Mao's revolution, who went around and destroyed any remnants of Chinese history they could. They tried to they would literally dig ancient emperors out of their tombs and defile them and desecrate them and burn them in the street and tear down statues. I mean, it's very similar to what we see going on now in the United States. So my father-in-law's mother never learned to read. As children, my mother-in-law spent a huge portion of her life in essentially abject poverty. She doesn't even like to talk about it. I've tried to get my mom or my mother-in-law to talk about her childhood and explain her childhood to me. She doesn't want to. She doesn't want to think about it. And you know, some people attribute the economic gains in China solely to the communist economic structure. But a large part of it is obviously China transitioned from a agriculturally based society to a manufacturing based society. But a lot of that was led by perhaps not necessarily Mao, but the leader that followed Mao really took from the ashes of the revolution and tried to learn some of the lessons that he actually learned, that they can't destroy their history because they need they need the foundation of their traditions. So they don't believe that Mao was perfect, but a lot of Chinese people that believe that he set them on the path of unification and then laid the groundwork from which the preceding leaders were able to transition China from an agriculturally based society to a manufacturing based society, where they became the hub of manufacturing for the rest of the world, particularly the Western world, selling cheap products to the rest of the world. And it's that same level of innovation and work ethic that they used during the Great March to become that. I mean, you see the work ethic in China, it's incredible. And they don't make excuses. They're not worried about the baby ground owl. They're worried about becoming rich, because you know what's worse for the environment? Poverty, as we said earlier. Because when you're killing everything in sight just for food and burning all of the trees down to stay warm during the winter, it's not so great for the environment. Turns out you're much better off getting wealthy and burning coal. You need a certain level of economic sustainability before you can afford to care about the environment. And believe it or not, there's more forest in China now than there was back then, because people have stopped burning down the forests for fuel and warmth. But a lot of them feel like Mao set them on the path to where they are now. And in just the course of a couple generations, where my grandmother-in-law never learned to read, now they're one of the most well-educated societies in the world. In fact, Chinese students are actively discriminated against in our high-end education institutions like Harvard. There are policies on the books that are the reverse of affirmative action, where Asian students actually have to score significantly higher than anybody else because they're disproportionately getting into the schools and kicking ass. The most successful ethnic group in the US are Asians. 50% of our Harvard classes, particularly in the STEM fields, are Chinese students who come here, go to American universities and get degrees in the STEM fields, and then go back to China and compete against us. You might not realize this, but part of the reason the US is struggling is because every single year, China graduates more engineers than the United States has engineers. So they have this incredible work ethic. They have these incredible traditions, and they have finally gotten on their feet. And China's big problem right now is they're getting too rich too fast, and they can no longer sustain themselves as the manufacturing base of the world because their people are becoming too wealthy to be manufacturers. And that's part of their Belt and Road Initiative, because they've come up with a long-term plan to make Africa, which as I said earlier, according to the UN, is the fastest growing economies in the world. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, China intends to make Africa the China of China. So what China was for the United States, the manufacturing base, the cheap labor base, right? And it might work. And the United States has just been sitting around twiddling our thumbs and wondering why China's kicking our ass. I mean, we have left-wing politicians who come out and say, we need to pass these minimum wage laws, we need to pass these environmental laws, we need to pass these regulations, these regulations, these regulations. And yeah, there is a healthy place for regulations, right? Obviously, and there's libertarian argument for it. You know, obviously, when you dump pollution into the river, you are imposing a cost on the rest of society. And obviously, we don't want to destroy our economy. But what China's been doing, they've made such remarkable strides over the last couple generations. I mean, they were able to send their daughter to school in the United States.
Hi, KHNC listeners. Jerry Axton with Sears Real Estate. Please keep me in mind when you are ready to buy or sell, or if you have real estate questions. Another option is the lease with option to buy. The lease program is set up with a year-to-year lease and guarantees a fixed rent and purchase price for 5 years. Jerry Axon, 970-576-1089, 576-1089. Jerry at SearsRealEstate.com.
Every 2 minutes, a child becomes a victim of sex trafficking in the U.S. It's happening right now. Don't turn off the radio or change the channel. Don't cover your kids' ears, no matter how much you want to ignore it. Child trafficking is real. In fact, it's happening in your town. And you know what our greatest weapon against child trafficking is? It's our children. It's time to act with PACT. That's Partners Against Child Trafficking. PACT works to teach students how to identify the warning signs of child trafficking so they can help other vulnerable kids around them. PACT student ambassadors receive in-depth training on the issue and design a project to raise awareness, reduce victimization, and disrupt demand. Visit pact.city to start donating today. That's pact.city. And for as little as $5 a month, you can help end child exploitation.
Is the driveway made of fruit leather, or has the apple stopped appling? If your half of a 100-foot cottonwood tree just needs a haircut, call Affordable Tree Service North at 970-568-6898. We have saved many trees everyone else said was dead. Ah, show offs! Hey, you're not in this one either. From fire mitigation, bushes, trees to bees, that's 568-6898. God bless us!
So we've had politicians in the United States, primarily on the left, but also on the right, trying to appease Americans who want to feel better about what they're doing and are honestly spoiled and want better work. And there's nothing wrong with wanting better work conditions, right? But they've made us wholly uncompetitive. And now their strategy is to double down, right? You have the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders saying that we need to oppose a 70%, a 90% tax on the wealthiest in our country. And they think about it this way. You open a business, right? And you fight for years and years and years to make it successful because almost every business fails. It's almost impossible to start a successful business that actually grows. I mean, a lot of people manage to start a small business, which our government is currently in the process of crushing beneath their boot as quickly and as harshly as they possibly can. But you accomplish the impossible task of creating a business, growing a business in a sustainable and productive way, and then some progressive politician comes around and wants to impose a 90% tax rate on you, Green New Deal style regulations that makes it twice as expensive for you to produce the same product as a Chinese company, minimum wage laws that means you have to pay someone 5 times the wage that a company in China has to, and all these other government mandates on your business. And then people go out and buy cheap crap at Walmart that's made in China anyways. And what are we going to do? Stop all trade from China? Well, the rest of the world is still going to buy for them if we're totally uncompetitive. Why is half the world accepting Huawei 5G telecom technologies from China? Because the US doesn't have a competitor to that, because Huawei is better. Because while we are subsidizing the stupidest crap, while we are sending billions of dollars around the world, the United States is number 1 on the world's giving index. China's at the bottom of the list. One of the wealthiest societies in the world. They're not dumping money into foreign aid. They're putting on their own oxygen mask first, which in many ways is what we should be doing. We have struggling communities. That's why the left is gaining so much ground in the cultural sphere and in lagging communities, because we're not taking care of them. We're sending $100 million to Pakistan for gender study programs. So just in a couple generations, in their own lives, they haven't seen the tragedies. I mean, keep in mind, there's 1.6 billion people in China. 40 million to them is nothing. Yes, they think it was a tragedy, but they see, my father-in-law saw his mother grow up in abject poverty, unable to read, and throughout the course of his life, joining the military, and then the military then getting him a job at a successful company, he was able to marry, give his daughter a fantastic education, and then send her to school for almost $70,000 up front in the United States. And their currency is worth about 1/6 of ours. So 70,000 American dollars to them, that's a lot of money. Every time my wife goes back and visits China, she doesn't even recognize her city because it's growing so quickly. She has to relearn to navigate the city because they're developing so fast. China has gotten so efficient at building skyscrapers and giant 30-story apartment complexes that they've built entire cities. Well, California is passing more and more affordable housing regulations and making the price of rent so expensive that in order to rent a U-Haul from China to Texas, it costs 13 times as much to rent a U-Haul from California to Texas as it does from Texas to California, because things are so expensive in China and people, or in California, and people are bailing out so fast. When over the course of my father-in-law's life, he has seen his mother live in abject poverty, unable to read. And my wife now speaks 5 languages. She teaches English. She speaks better English than American citizens. She's an English teacher at the International Students Department at CSU. She teaches, or she speaks Chinese. She speaks English at a professional level. She speaks Saudi Arabian. She speaks or Arabic. She speaks French, and she speaks Korean. She was working about 5 hours a day, making about 4,000 American dollars a month when I met her. Now, of course, because I got her pregnant, and then there was immigration status stuff and everything else, and now we have a young child. She hasn't been able to return to the university, but eventually she'll be going back. They have seen that kind of economic prosperity since the revolution in China. And this is not a case for communist revolution. That's not what I'm making. I'm not saying I want to live under the Chinese system. I'm just trying to explain to you guys why Mao is revered in China and why the Chinese people have been willing to sacrifice certain freedoms for the sake of unification. The reason they crack down on religious minorities in China is because over the course of their history, different religious factions went to war with each other within the borders of China, and then outside powers exploited that state of civil war to hurt them. And so they've decided we would rather be unified and successful than tear ourselves apart. And that's exactly what China is doing to the United States now. They see the chaos, they see the division, and they know they can defeat us because they are united. Because they're not in a debate of whether or not it's acceptable to be proud of their country and stand for the national anthem. You're listening to the Bucky Dillon Morning Show, our morning show, 1360 KHNC. I'm trying to just give you guys a glimpse of the world outside of our.
I am a non-attorney spokesperson representing a team of lawyers who've helped people that have been injured or wronged. Have you been diagnosed with cancer? Are you one of the millions who have taken Zantac or other generic versions of this popular drug to help treat stomach issues? Then pay close attention to this message. The FDA said it detected low levels of a probable cancer-causing chemical known as NDMA in Zantac and other generic forms of this popular drug. They've banned sales and even removed it from the market. If you've been diagnosed with cancer and you've taken Zantac or a generic equivalent, call the legal helpline now. You could receive a free cash award and have your medical expenses covered. And there's no upfront cost to you. They only get paid if you win. So please call now. 800-932-1287. 800-932-1287. 800-932-1287. That's 800-932-1287.
Hi, I'm Dr. Nia Hurd-Garris with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Every year, hundreds of teens drown. If your teen hasn't learned to swim yet, it's never too late. Even if your teen is a strong swimmer, make sure to supervise kids of any age. No one should swim alone. Teach them to enter the water feet first, wear life jackets on a boat, and never use alcohol or drugs on the water. Drowning is preventable. For more, visit healthychildren.org.
Hi, this is radio host Bob Enyart, spokesman for Colorado and American Right to Life. God said, do not murder. They say you have a choice. The truth is, the choice in what is called a pro-choice right is about killing a child in the womb. Tragically, many on the left now advocate killing these babies even after they are born. Please choose God's law, choose life and love, and help us abolish abortion.
Triangle Cross Ranch, 36049 Weld County Road 51 in Gailton, Colorado, is a charity organization and a nonprofit residential facility. It is a place where people who need a little extra cognitive help can find the support and enjoy life they need. Give us a call at 970-454-2219. We'd love to have you come out and see us and see what we do. 970-454-2219, or type in Triangle Cross Ranch on Facebook. Look for Gailton.
If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animated contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains be set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were ever our countrymen. Samuel Adams.
I'm not saying all of this in defense or as a justification for the top-down government control and the surveillance state and the censorship imposed by the CCP. I'm explaining to you why the Chinese people don't want to trade systems and why they are willing to defend it. Because if we want to understand why our message isn't resonating around the world, we need to understand the narratives that are being told in other cultures. And we see the narratives being told in our own culture. It's controversial just to be proud of your country. China believes in progress through unification and work capacity. They have learned lessons from their history while we're forgetting lessons from our history. I'm a limited government advocate. I'm a free market advocate. I consider myself a conservatarian. But I'm just trying to give you guys a glimpse of the perspective of China, because we have a lot of hosts at KHNC that talk about China. We don't have very many hosts at KHNC that have an intimate relationship with that society, and I think that's one reason why KHNC likes having me around a little bit. But that's what it is. And I honestly believe if we could settle our differences, there are no two countries more competent to bringing the world to a better place than the US and China. But it starts with understanding, and it starts with communication. And I do believe there are ideological differences between our governing structures that are, I don't see how we're going to communicate and understand our way around them. And as we all know, those who study history are doomed to repeat it. Yet those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everyone else repeats it. I do think conflict between the US and China is coming. I hope not. I would dread the day. I think the US is been for the last couple decades drastically underestimating how tough and innovative and willing to work the Chinese people are. You're listening to the Bucky Dillon Show, our morning show on KHNC. It is Tuesday, January 5th, 2021. Hopefully it will be a better year. I'm going to aim for the stars. If I hit the moon, that's all right. You can contact me at libertyrevoltmedia@gmail.com, at buckydillon@khnc.net. Thank you for tuning in to KHNC, the Roar of the Rockies. Guys, have a wonderful day. The weather's going to be all right. Remember, on this day in 1930, Mao Zedong wrote, "A single spark can start a prairie fire." And that's just what he did. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning.
Does this corrupt monetary system give you a whack to the head or a poke in the eye? Call Patriot